Hey, lovely. Great. So welcome everyone. Really nice to have you all here this evening. Just a reminder to keep your mics on mute if they're not already, just so this is as smooth as possible. The way this evening's going to work is I'm going to ask Andres some questions for about the first 45-50 minutes. We'll kind of cover some background to the book, some background about him, you know, how he got to the work that he's doing now. And sort of from that, you'll get a bit of an understanding as to what you can really get from the book and what it entails. After that point, we will open the space up to you guys to ask any questions that you feel haven't been covered. So if you want at that point, you're welcome to unmute yourselves, raise your hand, then you can unmute yourself and ask the question in person. If you'd prefer for your face not to be on the recording and the YouTube live, then please put your question in the chat and I will read out the question on your behalf. So just be aware of whether you're happy for yourself to be visible beyond the events of this evening, basically, as to whether you have your mic and your camera on or not. We are planning to have this event saved on our YouTube channel for viewing afterwards. So there will be a kind of a record to go back to. Okay, so with that, I'm going to begin this evening's kind of Q&A. Before I do, I feel like I should just quickly show you all where you can find the book. So I'm going to quickly share my screen because we have very recently just finished a new website, which you can see here. We really loved our solar powered website, but it did have one major flaw, which was that we weren't able to sell any products from it. And books and workshops being a quite integral part of what we do, we found it quite difficult to kind of navigate that situation. So we have set up a new website. We're still going to have our solar powered website as a kind of reference that people can access as a showcase of an alternative way of making a website, but we'll also have this slightly more functional website where you can directly purchase our books and workshops and get more information from us, basically. So it's the same URL, sustainabledarkroom.com, and then you can just head to shop here and you'll see our new book, Back to Basics, right here. It's got all the details about the dimensions, the page size, what it's printed on, all of that fun stuff. So I want to stop sharing there. And really this evening is not to talk so much about the production of the book or all of those considerations in terms of environmental choices when it comes to printing and manufacturing a book, but it's really to talk more about what's the origins of it and what's the kind of backstory of it, and why have we worked with Andres particularly on this one. So we can talk about some of that other stuff maybe afterwards if anyone has specific questions. But for now, Andres, I'd love to start this evening off if you would give us a brief introduction to yourself and your practice.
Cool. Well, hello everyone. First, need to say that I'm very happy that this is happening. That the book is launching. But I'm Andrés Pardo. I'm based and I'm born in Montevideo. I spent like 20 years in Mexico. I'm back in my hometown like 2 or 3 years ago. Um, I have a degree in communication, but my usual work is closely related to filmmaking and photography. I'm a film editor, experimental filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, but most of my whole practice as a professional is closely related to lab processes and shooting film for features, documentaries, or ads. So that is like my background on the professional field. But I've started shooting like as a kid, as an amateur, like start shooting on these tiny toy cameras, the 126 Kodak cameras. And then I started shooting Super 8 when I was around 15. So I navigate for quite a lot of years related to film and photography and to process.
Great. And how did you get from that kind of early interaction with film and photography and the processes to this much more kind of in-depth chemical research and investigation that you've demonstrated in the book?
Well, I started processing my own films like mid 90s. My brother used to live in Guildford, and he bought me in the widescreen center in London. He bought me the chemical packs to process Super 8 and 16, the reversal process. So the nasty ones that come with potassium permanganate and acid fixers and all that stuff. Was when you can bring those white powders on the plane, and nothing happened. So I start processing my own films with those chemicals, and I always wonder what happened when they goes down the drain. Okay? And but back then, I just process. I use the chemicals till they are totally exhausted, or until unless I think it was exhausted, and then I just flush them down the drain. So around 2000 maybe, I read a photograph magazine that says something about a coffee developer. Okay. So I started digging out what's all about. Okay. So my first approach to the process was like in a traditional way, like pre-packed chemicals. And then because of the caffeinol, I started to realize that there's other ways to do stuff. So it's a journey that began like maybe late 90s or early 2000, but it takes like years of thinking on it until I reach a point to say, okay, I'm gonna start properly researching about this. Okay, so up to this point, it's like just like, okay, let's try to process in a funny way. Let's use coffee. Let's use other stuff. Then when I start like a proper research, I start to meet other people and see that other people around the world are doing that kind of stuff also.
So you kind of talk about going towards coffee and saying it almost as this novelty thing, and being maybe interested in it for those reasons, necessarily that having such explicit environmental concerns initially. Would you say that you were always thinking about the environmental strand, or do you think this research kind of came later, born out of a desire for a photographic experiment, a kind of experimentation and change within the medium?
Well, I came back from like my mom grows up in a farm. My grandma has a farm until I have like 7 or 8, maybe. And I grow up in what is called the rural Montevideo. So there are farms near my home, like tiny farms near my home. There are people that grows flowers to sell, all the stuff. So, and I grow. I like to grow plants in my backyard. I plant potatoes. I plant sunflowers. So I have like a connection since I was a kid with the soil and farming and all that stuff. But I never considered myself back then as a environmentally friendly or sustainable kid. It's like I was just a kid, in that place, in that moment. So, but when I take photos, for example, back then I never thought what happened with the silver or the, it's like years ago from my head then. When I truly start to think about the process in photography is when my wife was pregnant and my daughter like months to born, and I say, okay, in a couple of months we're going to have a toddler here, so I need to get rid of all these chemicals that are under my sink, because my approach to the lab is like a kitchen sink lab. I always work in the kitchen sink, and I think that it's good to have a close relation between cooking and working in the lab. So, like, my daughter is 15 right now, so maybe 15 years ago was when I was truly concerned about the problems related to photography, and I say, okay, let's start to research and process in another way that can be less toxic. The impact is less. The user is safe. But because I was working in the film industry, I also want to have kind of the same quality. So that is when all things came out, like 2008, 2009, around there. It's when I truly say, okay, these things need to change, so let's focus on that thing. And that is when I truly started to research. And nothing changed in me. It's like I'm not more sustainable right now than I was before that. It's just I changed my process related to photography.
Yeah. So it hasn't changed the way that you think about things externally in, outside of photography in your practice?
No, but what I observe, that is one of the things that I think is good to share that kind of things, is that people who reach this process through photography can translate it to another spheres of his daily life. Okay,
Yeah.
so my process is like this way, but maybe in another guy is like the other way. So that's what is interesting to me about sharing this process.
Yeah, and I think that reflects as well on the research and the references and the areas that you've pulled bits of information from to go into this book, because you talk about, Ayurvedic practices, but then you also talk about very historical photographic practices and some of the early inventors of photography, and all of these very, different areas of understanding, and these very very widespread research all filters into the way that you have approached kind of building and developing different recipes and the methodology for which you work. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how kind of not just who inspired you, but kind of how you pulled together all of these different strands of research and references.
Well, I'm a big reader. Okay, I read a big amount of stuff, from early photographic books to philosophy, poetry, ethical essays, and at some point I start to see that philosophy, sustainability, ethics, and photography and chemistry, for sure, it's deeply connected. Okay, and at one point, I reading about the pioneers of photography, I understand that like 150 years or 200 years ago, the things were done in a way that maybe they don't thought about that, but are more close related to what we now call moral responsibility about the use of resources or environmental ethics or style like that. Now have names, but back then they don't have names for that practices, and they do that way. So I'm just a guy that read a lot of stuff, okay, and I have the ability to link everything in into the photographic process. Okay, for example, I always put the wine process as a reference. I read a book about how the wine is done to understand how to properly extract and ferment the chemicals that we can take out of the plant to process film. Okay? And there's no a book that talk about that field of science related to film photography. But there is one or several that are related to wine industry, because they're looking for the same stuff that we are looking. The main difference is that you drink the wine, and we use the extraction to process film. So at some point, it's funny to say that, oh, I read a book of winemaking to know how to process film. Okay, so it's not how to process film, but it's to know such a big, a tiny part of the process to get by yourself what you need, instead of going to a store and buy a pre-pack developer or fixer or whatever solution to process you need. And so in short is that I read a big amount of stuff, and then I have the ability to translate into artistic practice. And I think that covers it.
Yeah, and I think I remember you telling me in the past that you have an incredible ability just to remember everything you've read, to read things, and it's kind of embedded in your memory. So that's, that's a gift in itself, to be able to draw on that great archive of everything you've read.
Yeah, it's like maybe I cannot remember properly like the fact that is written in the book, but I can remember where I read or when I read, and how to search it again. Okay. that is one of the problems with the big data that's on the internet, is that, well, it's a big amount of information. The problem is how to properly write the sentence in the search box to find what you need. And on my research, what helps me a lot was, for example, the archive.org, that site that start to collect like all the photographic and chemistry old books. That at the beginning is really hard, because like 10 years ago, they just put the book scan. Right now, you can search inside the book. Like 10 or 12 years ago, you just have the pages. So you need to go page by page trying to find what you're looking for, or you need to read the index. Right now, you just write it and it appears magically.
Yeah. So could you repeat the name of that site?
The archive.org.
Archive.org. Okay, we'll put that in the chat for everyone. And I think that for me, this, these ideas of getting information from lots of different industries and areas and, other areas of expertise also relates to ideas of community and the value of working in community and sharing our own knowledge with other people, because in turn someone else will be an expert in something else, or will have a little piece of information that you didn't have that can add to what you're understanding and what you're building on. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about your experience with community and why you share your knowledge with community, and why that's maybe important to you.
Well, I was raised with the idea that you need to share what you got to know what's left. Okay, so, and I grew up and I act in my daily life under that law. Okay, so I think if I have knowledge, okay, let's share that knowledge. I also have some benefits because I do workshops, so I can keep on with my research on what buying film and stuff like that. I need to keep on doing photography through that. But I think it improves the community. Like the main interest in Herschel, for example, was astronomy. Okay, and when he reached the IPO solution to fix film, he did not keep to himself. He said, "Hey Talbot, try this. Hey Daguerre, try this, because it's going to improve your practice." And I keep on looking at the stars. Okay, so I'm feeling inspired by those people, because not only because why they do, also because in the way they do. Okay, especially by Talbot, in the way that he approached the process, and they share information with their colleagues, because the sharing information will improve the community. And I think it's quite important to have a strong community. It's gonna ensure that we can keep on doing things on the right way. Aside from being sustainable or environmentally consciousness, I think that sharing knowledge is good in every way possible.
Yeah, and on that, you when we were first discussing the book, you were really I think the only strong point you had about the design, or the kind of what was in the book other than your text, was that it would include images or from different makers that had worked with your recipe, because you talked about the idea of the recipe almost being nothing without the demonstration of how it can then be utilized. And I feel like that very much links into the community. It's, you know, how what you develop is then used by others in interesting ways. I don't know if you want to talk at all about the other works from artists we included.
Well, I feel honored that there are people that are using the ideas that they translate into formulas for film processing, and they're working. They're not only working; they're building beautiful pieces of art, and they're included. Some of them were included in the book. I always say the same. Like, sometimes people write me and say, "Hey, can you share me the formula?" Yes, sure. Here's the formula. But the formula is just 3 chemical names with chemical amounts. It's nothing if I do not explain how it works, for how long it will be working, the exhaustion period, yeah, especially what you can expect. Okay? Because what happens when I share the formulas, like, okay, here's the formula. In a couple of days, the person is back with me and say, it's not working. Yeah, well, it's not working because just the formula, it's nothing. It's the process what is truly important. And the process is what is established on the book. And the process not only is the formula, not only is chemicals, is the time that you need to take to source your plants or your whatever organic source you're going to put in your mix. And I always try to make the people think in another way, because if you push people to think in another way, I think that is when something breaks inside the brain. And the sustainable approach, the conscious of being environmental friendly or moral or ethics or whatever word you want to put on that bag, starts, and there's a change in the behavior. It's what I think.
Yeah. And so, you know, you talk about a lot of people emailing you and asking for the formula. And I think, you know, a lot of people are keen to kind of get started with these practices and don't really know where to begin. So they might just ask for a formula initially. But in terms of approaching, you know, your own recipe building as a beginner, as someone who hasn't really got involved, you know, where would you say that you would start to build new recipes safely and with confidence as well, as a beginner?
Well, first I need to say that I never feel any fear about the chemistry.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of other people would, you know, not understanding what reactions might be going on, worried that they're going to, you know, release some horrible gas or.
I think that this modern world is so regulated that if something is really dangerous, it's gonna be a law that avoid that it's gonna that anyone can buy it. Okay? For example, mercury. You cannot buy mercury. And when I was a kid, I have this toy box that's called like something like Early Chemist, that comes mercury in a plastic jar. So I play with mercury in my hand. Okay, and that was like 40 years ago. Right now, there's no even mercury thermometers in the pharmacies anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that whatever you can buy on a modern city or in a city in a store is gonna be quite safe. Okay, so that's what was one of my first approaches. But then when I moved to Mexico, I understand that everything depends on the place where you are. Because in Mexico, I can buy anything I want. Okay, I can buy potassium dichromate by kilograms, and it's highly toxic. It's mutagenic. It's cancerogenic in like high levels. Um, and I just go downtown and buy. I need 5 kilograms of potassium dichromate, and nobody asked me, "What are you gonna do with that?" Okay.
Wow.
That is one thing, and the other thing is that when I start my proper research on toxicity, and I start like uh, reading about each compound independently to know, okay, I need to leave metal outside the equation, I need to leave hydroquinone outside the equation, I have these other options like catechol, ascorbic acid, resorcinol. Then I start to was when I hear about caffenol. So I start to read a lot about ascorbic acid and the possibilities of using it as a developer that was already used in Caffenol C. Uh, but I take a big amount of time reading about, okay, what happened with ascorbic acid, what happened if I mix it with this sodium salt or the other sodium salt. So back then I started reading chemistry books like the ones that you use in high school to try to understand what reactions it's happening. And so I reach a point that I say, okay, these two compounds, that is ascorbic acid and sodium carbonate, are safe. And years later, when I enter the Churubusco film residency, that I work with Maribel, the chemist, that it's explained in the book. And then I have like all the gear that I want in a proper chemical lab to test everything, and I have daily chats with the chemist about uh, the problems and the toxicity related to each compound. And the funny fact is that uh, things that for me are problematic or toxic, like I say, well, 8 grams of hydroquinone is toxic, right? And Maribel, the chemist, says, not at all. Nothing happened with that kind of stuff because everything is related to the amount, everything is related to your practice, to your knowledge, and like uh, in the size of Churubusco, 8 grams of hydroquinone is nothing. Okay, in the size of a kitchen sink lab, 8 grams of hydroquinone is 4 liters of development. So,
Yeah.
and that is another thing that I try to um, um, explain on the book. It's like everything is related on the place where you are, to the scale that you are working on. So again, the formula is just nothing because there are so many variables in the equation that you need
Yeah.
to consideration.
And I think that's important to note, that the book is not a set way of doing things. It's not a, guide that you follow from A to Z. It's much more of a guide in sense of a way to navigate according to where you are and the place, and thinking about all of these specificities. And I think also, what you're talking about with really taking the time to look at each of those things that you were using, the basic chemistries of the ascorbic acid and the sodium carbonate, and taking the time to look them up and, you yourself feeling then confident that, okay, I know that both of these are, you know, safe and I can now build upon them. I think that also kind of brings us to the idea of giving yourself that time and slowing down a bit more in your practice, to not feel like you have to just, you know, develop a film in an hour and mix your chemistry and it's done, and, you know, bish bash bosh, you get your, you know, you get from A to B, but much more about the benefit that you can have of a much more reflective approach to working, to really understand your materials more with having that slower relationship with them. But even despite this, you know, I think a lot of people coming to Sustainable Darkroom, and to this overall approach of working with photography, it's picked up so much traction in the past 4 years, and, you know, often people are still looking for that kind of quick fix, that easy formula, that, you know, quick way of achieving the environmental goals that they want to achieve. You know, they want to know what's the most sustainable recipe, or how can they become an eco-friendly photographer. So I wondered what your thoughts were on this, and how we can yeah, really build that that approach into the way that we encourage others to work.
When film manufacturers build a film, the silver needs a period of where the crystal grows. So it's called the aging. So they store the emulsion in an incubator, and it was, depending on the film that you're going to be building, if it's a fast film or slow film, it changed the time of the silver aging process, but could be up to like 2 or 3 weeks. And that's just one part of the process of the film manufacturing. So since the operators push the button to start the machines, since to the roll is coming out of the machine, can pass several weeks, okay, in terms of the whole process of it. So just building a roll of films takes time, okay. Then film brands introduced the idea that you can steer a pre-packed mix of chemicals and use it straight away. But even that way, you need to wait for a short aging process. That's why Kodak say that mix your, for example, if you buy a pack of Dettol, the water should be around 40-45 Celsius degrees, because why they do the math and they see that the time that the solution needs to go from 40-45 to 20, that's the working temperature, is the time that the chemicals needs to properly age and mature. In Churubusco, for example, they mix the chemicals and they leave it for 2 or 3 days of maturation. So everything have a related time to properly work. Okay, yeah. So I just feel that that speed should also be related in the lab. So if you take time to light the scene, to put the camera where it should be, to change the lens because you want to be close, or you take the time, you make a lot of decisions during the shooting day or filmmaking date or whatever practice using film you're using, why you want to go fast on one of the most important process at the end, that is the processing. Okay.
Yeah.
Take your time to think on which developer will be the best, which temperature, because temperature will impact on the density and the contrast. And if you take those times with all that thing, well, take a time also to build your own developer, to wait a week until it's good to use. But if you don't want to go that way, you can also use the fast way. But the fast way is not 10 minutes. The fast way, following like the formulas and the ideas that are in the book, is like 20 minutes, half an hour. What is established in the book is that need practice. Okay? It's not that you're gonna process your first roll and everything is gonna be shiny and amazing. Maybe it happens, okay, because sometimes miracles happens, but what I understand during those years and what I try to translate in the book is that you just need to practice a lot using those methods, and then you're gonna reach a point that you can do it like in the normal piece, or you can do it faster. You just need to understand how to, and then you can process like many rolls a day and working faster than you ever imagined. And maybe it's a spoiler, but the fast process will come in the second volume.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, I certainly, even though I've, worked with these processes for a while, not nowhere near as long as you, but even, reading the book, I felt like I gained a huge amount of kind of it cemented a lot of the knowledge in different ways that I didn't really know that it would, which was really interesting. And so I think it's going to be really exciting to see how it not only brings a lot of new practitioners a way of understanding things, but also brings practitioners who have already been experimenting a lot themselves and who have already kind of on the path and have been working with low toxicities developers for a while, to then really bring them a kind of deeper level of understanding of what's going on, and to give them also more kind of confidence and a more expanded look as well as to what's going on, and how it can then also be pushed further, because the book isn't conclusive. It kind of it's only partway through your research. This is volume 1, and we've only just got to the introduction of plants at the end of volume 1, so it's like there's all of this. I think a lot of people might assume that the book is mostly about working with phenols and working with plants, but actually it's not really about that. It's about all of the stuff that comes before that, and all of the knowledge that you build on to even get to that point of the plant. So for me, that's what was really exciting, is that it's kind of unexpected, and I think a lot of that knowledge that you've built on to get to the plant is sometimes kind of overlooked, or not considered. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what people think of it. And just a final question from me before we open it up to some of our lovely audience members. And I know a few of my questions have been tricky, but this is also a tricky one. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on if there is a future for photography that is truly sustainable.
well, the process needs to be rethinked. It's being rethinked on the user's level. Like what we're doing today is like rethinking the process on the user level. I think we are reaching a gap where small labs, universities, and the academy is looking at what all those artists are doing on that layer. So we are going one layer over that. And I think we need to keep on climbing layers till we reach the industrial process. Okay, if the industrial layer keep on for many years more, maybe like in 5 or 10 years, they all gone broke, and there's no more film from big brands, and we just keep on small companies. I was chatting with Ed Carr when I think was when he was shooting the I Am a Darkroom documentary, which, by the way, is amazing. And if I'm right, he asked me a similar question, and I say, for me, one approach for a more sustainable silver photography is that the brands start to use recycled silver, okay, instead of freshly mined silver. We don't need the silver cutlery. We don't need the silver tray from our aunt or great grandmother. And if you go to a flea market in Mexico, here in Uruguay, you cannot imagine the amount of kilograms of silver that is laying on the stores that nobody is buying. Okay? So maybe if a brand say, okay, let's introduce a recycled silver film emulsion, okay, then the sustainable approach will start from the industrial process and start to fall down instead of going up. That is the hardest way that we are doing. And I'm really confident it's going to work at some point. But I think at some point both sides try to do something that, for example, some chemical manufacturers start to do it with their chemicals solutions, like introducing ascorbic acid developers or introducing fixers that needs less water in the final wash, stuff like that. But compared to the big guys in the film industry, there are small efforts. So I think sustainability in film photography at some point needs that kind of rethinking the process. Let's start working with recycled stuff rather than to keep on digging the earth.
Yeah. And that seems like, in terms of all of the changes that need to be made in the industry, moving from, virgin mined silver onto recycled silver seems like would be one of the most simple changes as well. It's not trying to come up with a whole new recipe, or it's not trying to change a fundamental part. I mean, I don't know how it would affect it using, new silver in comparison to using recycled silver, but just from no knowledge, it seems like it would not be a really difficult change to make.
Yeah, in theory, is not a problem.
Yeah.
In practical terms, I think it represents several challenges. But one of the things that I always say during the workshops or also in the book is establishing that we need to phase away from the ideas of how photography should look like. Okay, we have the idea of this truly black and white, shiny, fiber-based image on the gallery, and we were taught that that is the way that it should look like. But photography on the on its simplest level, it doesn't look like that, because gelatin, when you use a developer like hydroquinone, it will stain. Okay, so the paper will turn yellow. So they start to introduce anti-stain agents on the paper and in the film to try to reach the whitest point, because cultural, we think that that's the way a black and white or a color photography should look like. Okay? So maybe if they introduce recycled silver, photography will look like different. Well, maybe we need to learn a new way of photography that looks like the other way, and that is one of the things that I try to express in the book and on my Instagram or on my post, that you should love your results as it came out from the tank. Okay, if you have images, okay, well done. Keep on working until you reach your the image that you like, not as should be.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone in the audience have any questions that they would like to ask? As I said, if you don't want to ask them out loud, you can put them in the chat, and they can be directed at either myself or Andres, or you can raise your hand. Alice, you've got your hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just wondering, Andreas, I've been having some conflict about what to call this kind of chemistry that we make with plants. Do you have any insights into what a sort of what a good name would be? Because obviously we're using plants to make the developer, but also there's other things in there. So yeah, what is your preferred term for describing these kind of ecologically focused chemistries that still include raw chemistries that are, in and of themselves kind of toxic?
Well, I try to avoid the organic developer, okay? Because organic in chemistry means that it holds a carbon in the chain, okay? But for developers that uses plants, I always relate to them like plant-based developers. I tend to think on the biggest amount of things. Okay, for example, when you put two chemicals on the water, or three chemicals on the water, the ones that react first are the ones that are in higher concentrations. Okay? That's like one of the simplest chemical law. Reaction happens with the highest concentration chemicals in the solution. So if you're building a developer that is like 1 liter of plant extraction, 10 grams of ascorbic acid, and 40 grams of carbonate, well, the biggest amount is the plant extraction. So it's a plant-based developer. If we go to a developer that is based on just one developer agent, well, I try to name it based on that developer agent. So this is an ascorbate developer. I call it simple because it's the simplest formula that I reach. Hydroquinol, for example, it's a formula patented like more than 100 years ago. It's a developer that uses only hydroquinone as a developer agent, and they call it hydroquinol. So I try to name it that way. Like I think on the component that is more present, and this is the way I try to do. One thing that is important, that even if I came back from a scientific background, I do not follow a scientific approach to everything, because on my research and in the book you can see that I go back and forth. Okay, so I research plants and then I move to iron, but then I go back to plants, and because it depends even on the seasons, when the plants are available to me. So I don't have a proper approach to naming the developers. I sometimes look for funny names like gunk or muddy, but in terms of developers that uses plants, I call them plant-based developers. I prefer to call it plant-based developers rather than any other name that are online, like edible or eatable or stuff like that.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Jose, you also have your hand raised. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing all the work and everything. I was curious, the other day I was watching the I Am a Darkroom film, and one of the things that I don't remember who said it, probably Ed, said like there's an inevitable push to change the visual language through all these sustainable methods. So I would like to know how in your transition to these methods you felt like your visual language in photography change or modify, or if by all these experiments you notice, for instance, that some particular things that you were photographing or some certain sort of light or some sort of condition were giving you a special quality that then you will be able to explore more thanks to the technique or something like that. I'm not if I am being clear enough.
Yeah. I was close related to Super 8 since I was a kid. Okay. My father shooting Super 8, and with one of the cheapest cameras ever available. Okay. So, and when I was a kid, the TV that we had at home, it was a black and white TV, like 14 inches size. Okay. And because we live so far away from downtown, when their big antennas of the channels are, we see almost in a crappy way. So Super 8 toy cameras and a crappy TV made me raise with a visual culture that is not shiny and pristine. Okay, so I'm really related to images that do not look like what it's supposed to, by like cultural heritage, for example. So in my case, it's natural. Okay, I'm really used to watch stained images that it's supposed to be black and white, but mine are yellow. I'm really used to use cheap lenses for photography that do not have the sharpest image in the world, and my approach and my practice in Super 8 keep on since I was a child, and it's a medium that when you project on the wall, when you shoot the film, the quality itself is low compared to mainstream cinematography or photography. So in my case, that's really natural. I don't feel any change in the way I approach photography because of the methods I'm using or the formulas I'm sharing on the book. But as it stands in the book, everything is related to where you are, okay, to the place where you are, and that relates to the cultural history or knowledge on your side. So on my case, it does not change much, but that will depend on each person. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Jose.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a note on that as well, because it's an interesting point that often gets raised is the visualization of these kind of processes, and whether that being a concern of these processes impacting the kind of more traditional form of how images look being a negative thing from some people's view, and also, you know, on the other side, the kind of unexpected and great range of different visual results being a positive thing from people who are interested in that more playful experimental side. And at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about really wanting to perfect a recipe and wanting to get kind of the best results. And so I think it's important to note that there's kind of both sides there to play with. I think that the recipes can either be pushed to be completely perfected and to have that very traditional look of, you know, a very well tonal range with a fine grain print and negative, or it can also be pushed in the other direction to really enhance those, you know, unique characteristics of strange tones and, you know, patterns occurring. So I think that's something really exciting about these processes. And it's more broadly, as we were talking about, you know, the use of, for example, recycled silver by the film manufacturing companies. If those kind of more fundamental changes to the materials were to start to shift, then we might overall see a more, like a bigger shift in the way that we understand what photographic images are. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's lots of different levels to it, because there's so many materials in play and so many points at which it could change, depending on what we're, you know, kind of tempering with. And it kind of also again relates to a question that Kaya Lewis asked in the chat. She said, you talk about a top-down approach to this industrial process, you know, top-down as in the lead for sustainability should come from the manufacturing companies. So she also wonders if this similar top-down approach to how photographs are received and shown, do you think that is also the way forward, so that there's basically more acceptance from museums and galleries and collectors for this but for a more broad understanding of what photographic print and process looks like?
I'm going to say something that maybe helps with that. When film companies change the chemistry, okay, to make photography look like as we know it's supposed to be look like truly black and white. Blacks are really black, highlights are really highlights, stuff like that. No? And you have all this tonal range. Okay, so they changed the chemistry to reach that point. On the other way, in color photography, they have the chemistry that is so hard to get that they do not change the chemistry. They change what they put in the film, so they work properly together. That is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to build color developers that do not use the CD1, CD2, or any of the color developers. We can do that in black and white because black and white can vary chemistry and color not. And in the same way that brands change the chemistry to make the look of the photography, and for several years was there, if I understand well the question, I think what's happening is that for several years up today, people like us that change the chemistry, plays with the chemistry, playing around or just looking for another look. Okay, some of them are like big names in photography, okay, that start to get attention, and then everything starts to fall down to us. So I think that's what's happening, but I'm not sure if that is if it answers the question.
Yeah, I think in my view on the question, I think there is already becoming, or there is, already some more acceptance from museums and galleries for this other approach to photographic kind of practice and print. I think, we're seeing more of it in the mainstream, and whether that's tied to this kind of ecological push at the moment, it might well be, it might be more of like, curators joining a trend and trying to promote what they think is right at the time. But I think so long as that acts in a way that it does open up the view of what photography can be, not just this traditional black and white print on the wall, then, that has to be a positive thing, because from there we can build on that. Hopefully that answers your question a bit, Kai.
I think also one of the nice sides of the internet is that you don't need a curator, you don't need a gallery to put your images online. So at some point you're going to start to be noticed, but also you start to inspire other people. Okay, and that like creates a flow that start to be more evident. For example, Lens Culture, the online magazine, okay, that shares like, I don't know, but maybe 10, 15 different photographs a month. So it's a huge amount of researching different photographers around the world to show their work. And some of them, not all work on film, many work on digital, but some of the ones that are working on film, like have the image series is like blurry faces or out of focus, big sides of the image is like totally out of focus, or are like fast movements trying to get captured on toy cameras. And that start to change the way that we think on how photography should look like, because at the end, internet is like a big gallery. So if it's there, and if it's hanged by a magazine like Lens Culture, should be from some important photographer. And that also applies to the sustainable approach. Okay, that is what I think it's happened. Maybe at some point I should focus on a more anthropological study of what's going on.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions in the chat. One from Ed, I believe, who asks, is a color homemade developer possible in the future?
It's a what, sorry?
Is a color homemade developer possible in the future?
Well, there are two things that can be approached here. One is that you can still work with color chemistry, okay, but you need to ensure that your waste degradation process is the one that gonna reduce like as much as possible the impact. Okay.
Yeah.
That is one approach that it's also established in the book. Like leaving plants aside will not leave hydroquinone out of the equation, because plants can also give you hydroquinone. So with some plants, you need to know that you're gonna be having some chemicals that needs to be treated in another way during the disposal process. And the other way is the only source that I know up to this point that is that I read somewhere, is that hallucinogenic mushrooms have a phenol that is called psilos something. It's a tryptamine that is closely related to the color developer. So it might at some point process the color.
Yeah, I think this is what Ricardo.
But not in the way we work, but not in the way that we know the colors look like.
I think this is what Ricardo Leite is researching in Portugal.
Yeah. It's close to Ricardo's research.
Yeah. Another question, we're kind of veering away from black and white developers or developers in general. A question from Beatrice is, do you have any information or just thoughts on sustainable plastic alternatives for a film base?
Well, again, there are two ways of reaching this. You can still use the plastics as we know and rely on these moth worms that it's supposed that they're eating plastics. So maybe we can rely on worms that eat plastic to destroy everything. But if you cannot use plastic, or there's no more oil or whatever source to build plastic, I think washi films it's a good example of it, because they have a series of film that use washi paper to build film. Okay, so but it changed the process, because the idea of film is that it should be a transparent medium, so light can go through it to be scanned or to be enlarged. But if we think on Daguerre, okay, he worked on copper plates. Okay? So maybe we just need to stop thinking on plastic alternatives and start thinking on other bases. Okay, a piece of wood can be soaked with liquid emulsion, and you can have your image in a piece of wood. So that's what I always try to get into focus. Okay, plastic is a problem, but maybe we cannot make it better. Maybe we just need to leave it aside.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I'd agree that I think, washi film has been going for quite a few years already, and he's got a great product. And do you think something like that could be, more scaled up, more mass produced? Because at the moment that's, a one-man band, and it's a very specific operation, and so therefore the price reflects that, which is completely fair enough. He hand coats all of the film, on his own in his lab, but that obviously then makes that film only available to those that can afford it, and analog photography can already be quite an inaccessible medium. So could something like that be scaled up so that it can be more accessible, do you think?
I think it just needs a shark to invest in it. Okay, so instead of having one, let's do not leave aside the human factor. But if you instead of having just one hand coating the film, you have 10 people hand coating the film. Okay, well, you can have 10 times what you done. And I'm when you raise it to industrial level, something is lost in the process that is not working anymore in the same way. But maybe multiplying just by 10 or 20 is not hard, and it keep on with the ethos of the film and the thing, but it makes more accessible to the brand. There's a guy on the internet that selling dry plates, and he also hand coat his plate, and the quality is amazing. And what I know and I see is that he just read a bunch of books about how to properly coat film plates. So if he can be cloned by 10, that's amazing. And it's not a big number. It's just 10. I'm not sure how many rolls are being sold a month, but I do not think that people are shooting that much that we need a big production. Like I bought 10 rolls like 4 months ago, and I still have 7.
Yeah, and that's probably also partly to do with the particularities of working with it, it's, and also then when it comes to developing it, because the material is so different. We've had a few suggestions in the chat of maybe some mushroom base films and some
could be
plastic films, so who knows what the future holds. Hopefully all of that. Beatrice had a second part to her question. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that we should understand is that the film that we know right now start with the film, with the cinematography industry. So the plastic base is treated in a way that you can run it through a motion picture film camera up to 60 seconds frames per second, and it's gonna be okay. Okay, so there will be no damage with that film. That plastic base was thinked for that kind of camera, so you roll a big amount of frames per second. for film photography, we don't need that plastic strength, okay? But we use it because the machines that made plastic base for all the industry.
Yeah.
That's why washing can work on paper, because if you use a gentle camera that is well serviced and transport the film, the base, the paper, the plastic, whatever base is, in a gently and smooth way, okay, you can use a base that does not need that kind of strength.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting to think about how, we just use technologies, we just use what we already have rather than always thinking of what is, specifically needed for how the kind of medium develops, or, what the other usage is. And yeah, I'd never thought that that was the reason why we had this thick plastic base, was so that it could have that kind
we
of
use Bell and Howell perforations. Okay? 35 millimeters use Bell and Howell perforations. We don't need perforations. Okay? 120 prove that. It's just a roll of film. We don't need perforations. They put perforations in it because they have the film that runs through a camera that uses perforations. So, okay, let's put perforations in the still photography cameras.
Yeah. And maybe as one of the final questions, I'll go back to Beatrice's question earlier, which was, the second part was, have you ever noticed any deterioration across your negatives in your archive?
In the ones that I processed with my methods.
So I guess she means, yeah, in the ones that you've tested your own developers in.
No, well, I use sodium hyposulfate as a fixer. Okay, even if I research salt fixer, and I'm working right now calcium chloride fixer, and I'm researching also about solubility of silver on other types of solutions to be used as a film fixer. I use sodium hyposulfate fixer because the toxicity of it in the amounts that we use is really low, and you can get archival stages with it. Okay, so all the films that they process, unless there are tests that they don't really care, I use a proper fixer with a proper method. Okay, so with that method, I know that my negatives will last at least 100 years, more than I'm gonna live. And in Churubusco film, we perform a stability test. That is a test that you do to study the stability of the film after it's been processed. And they came up that are under Kodak standards. So the developer, the plant-based developer, sodium thiosulfate fixer, and the whole process that is established in the book came up under Kodak standards. So we're using an industrial process to measure our like the sustainable process. But the other thing is that how to read is that, okay, it's gonna be properly stored for a couple of decades.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's things deteriorating also might not have anything to do with the chemistry. It could be just environmental conditions, how they've been stored, or lots of things play into that. So all right, does anyone have, oh yeah, we've just had 2 last questions come through, so we'll finish with these if that's all right. from Omnia. She asked, would you consider working with plant-based developers a necessity, especially when producing non-standard, low-quality images in relation to the biased history of the industry-made color film history towards white skin, for example, in the 70s with the Shirley cards?
A necessity? I don't think so. I think it's a choice. I don't ever think on.
I guess what she's getting at is the kind of the accessibility and the more inclusivity that plant-based developers brings. I don't know if you want to expand on this yourself anymore, Omnia, because I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Okay. Well, one of the main ideas of my whole research and the idea of the workshops and the book and all what we are doing is to make the process more accessible. Okay, so again, in some places there's no other way to process rather than using plant-based developers, because there are places so regulated by customs or too far away from the big stores that they cannot buy Kodakill for Bellini or whatever chemistry to process, and they rely on plant-based development. But I think it's all related to the amount of connection that you have to the place where you are. Okay, I came back home here in Montevideo like 3 years ago, and I never noticed that Montevideo is fully loaded with black nuts trees. Okay, and when I came back, I started to notice that I can gather black nuts like in every corner, okay? Because my connection to the city right now changes, and I think because of where I am right now and what I'm experiencing right now, okay, maybe there is a necessity of trying to reach those things that connect me to the place. But at some point, I think that is so personal, but it's going to change from one place to the other, from one person to the other, and from one project to the other. Okay, because right now I'm working that way. Maybe in the future, I start to think on a new photographic project that I need to use conventional chemistry, and I say, okay, but I'm gonna be sure that the waste degradation process reach the standard that I know that it should be. And I think that covers the question, I think.
Yeah, and maybe what I would add to that from our side is that, I think the notion of trying to work, sustainably, very much includes all of these threads, from the social and the political to the environmental, and the histories of all of that. And so, in that sense, working with these processes is a necessity if we want people to re-understand those histories and our connection to all of them. So maybe that's not exclusive to plant-based developers, but maybe that's more of a kind of general approach and ethos of working with this industry and with these materials, paying recognition to you know, everything that they kind of stand for and have been used for, and have impacted and been, you know, entangled with both currently and in the past. Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, but what is the thing is that when the sustainability ecological movement words came out of someone spoken, people tend to think on recycling, being more conscious, stuff like that. But for me, one of the most important parts of being or approaching a sustainable practice is to avoid dependency. Okay, so it's to stop being dependent on developers or specific chemistry, stuff like that. And I think this method, it's a book, what Sustainable Darkroom is promoting is to try to reach a point to stop depending on what the industry says that you should use. Okay,
Yeah.
Like make your own choice and try to reach a point that you can build your own solutions. And one thing that is important about the book is that it's an open research. Okay, I take some names like Roland Morney, Patrick Gaynor, that are people that were researching like 20, 30 years ago, and sadly they're both gone a few years ago. And I just take what they do and know and keep on doing it. So what I hope, what I expect is that at some point in the near future is that someone took that book and keep on working to make it better. Okay, to say and write me and say, you know what, instead of using that amount of carbon, I'm using this other chemical that is cheaper, it's better, and makes the images look in another way. So I think we are under an open source thing on a old-fashioned thing like a book.
Yeah. We're going a bit over time, but I will just ask lastly Omnia's second question, because I think they're both really great questions, which brings us more onto digital technologies. So she asks, firstly, if you use any digital technologies in your process, which I would say myself is almost impossible to do because we all exist with, you know, we're talking now on a digital screen, and is that part of our practice? And we made the book, you know, I made the book on a laptop, and you know, much of the way we disseminate work would not be possible without digital technology. So I would argue that it's near on impossible to have a purely analog photography in the contemporary age. And so off the back of that, she asks, how do you think about highlighting the invisible and violent toxicities of the digital technologies that could possibly be more violent than the maybe more obvious film toxicities of plastics and chemistries, etc.?
Well, that's another big chat.
It's another big question, but we can say something on it just to kind of conclude.
I try to not go into that direction. Just my approach is to focus on the benefits of doing film photography that way. Okay, because if what I feel if I go down into the toxicity of the digital film photography, okay, immediately I should stop using a cell phone. because it's the same.
Yeah, and I think you know, there's so many things that we could try and tackle, so many things that are problematic with, you know, the world, and things that we interact with and things that we use, and it's impossible to you know, try and look at alternatives for all of them, and to, you know, really do deep, thorough research into all of them, because we, you know, we want to do a good job of what we're putting out there as well. And so in order to do that, we need to be really thorough with our research. And so you are limited with how much you can cover. But we at the Sustainable Darkroom, you know, we're a slightly bigger team than you, who's just on your own, Andres. And we do bring in practitioners who work with more digital technologies, because we don't want to be exclusively having a conversation about analog. We do want to also, you know, have an area which does think about digital technologies. And it's something that we're hoping to expand as well. We're going to be having another workshop in our slow photography series this year, which will focus on digital technologies in photography. And we'll also have a much more theoretical kind of critical perspectives workshop again from Alice, which will think about kind of some of those top kind of like legacies and links more broadly. So I think, you know, whether we do enough to highlight that dynamic, I don't know, but I think we certainly don't want to shy away from the conversation, or we definitely want it to be present. And I always make a point as well, you know, personally, of saying that digital is not any better. You know, digital is not like the green card out. You know, we're not here to talk about all of the issues with analog photography to then suggest that you go and shoot digital, because, you know, it does have a huge its own huge issues, and it's a very nuanced way up. You know, you can't just black and white say that you're, you know, more environmentally and ethically friendly because you use one medium over the other. And that, I think, reiterates your point that you've made quite a few times this evening, of that it's just completely dependent on who you are as a practitioner and also where you are. You know, it's really that location and that embodied and embedded way of working in place that affects, you know, your impact in the way you practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex world in terms of everything, you know. So at the end, it will depend on how you do the things, you know, rather than the gear that you're using. But I think the reader will make that clear when he or she ends the first book, is that, as Timothy Morton say, like, the whole process is more important that for each individual thing that makes the process itself. It's like the whole is what it's really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, Andreas. It's been a great conversation, and
yeah, thank you very much. I'm really happy that it's happening. My wife always say to me that you should write a book, and then your idea came out, and today I get crazy because you post that it's just 1 year since we start talking about this book, and it seems a long journey, but for me it's quite fast to have a book in a year. So I hope the reader enjoy it, and make a shift on what's going on.
Yeah. I think your dog's happy that you made a book as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's my model. Yeah. So
Okay.
thank you very much for everything, and hope you enjoy the book and the rest of the day.
Thank you, Andres. You too. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.